It was revealed this weekend that Donald Trump might have personally profited from the missile strikes against an air base in Syria. Now, we don't know for sure. I want to make that clear up front. Some people are reporting this as fact. It appears that he might have personally profited. Here is how. According to Trump's financial disclosure reports filed with the FEC back in 2015, thanks to the presidential election, his stock portfolio at that time included investments in technology firms, financial institutions, and defense firms, including Raytheon, a name that you might have seen in the news recently since they made the missiles that Donald Trump fired into Syria. Now, they are not the only US company that produces cruise missiles. They produce these particular ones. Now, he could have theoretically sold his stock in the time between 2015 and now. A smart president would have, to avoid possible conflicts of interest, or at least the appearance of conflicts of interest. But I ask you this, does Donald Trump give an F about that? No. And they could present the information. He could release his taxes, he could do a full financial disclosure, and he could allay our fears that this guy might literally profit from the US going to war. They choose not to do that. And we have seen nothing since the inauguration that should lead us to believe that he would not personally profit in this way. Now, how might he profit? Well, let's take a look at this. This is a recent timeline of Raytheon stock price. See that little uptick? Yeah, that was as soon as the market resumed trading the morning after the strikes. Now, people said that that represented for Raytheon an addition of $1 billion of value, which is true. Now, to be fair, if you expand the timeline, it's not like this is a record high for Raytheon. They had been sort of on the downslope. Now they're going back up. So let's not go crazy, but that is $1 billion. And if you look at 5 of the biggest defense contractors in the US, many had similar upticks, not all of them, and I did the research. I went through all the stocks I could think of, but some of them did. And for about 4 or 5 of those, it represented $5 billion being added to the value of their corporations, thanks to the strikes in Syria. Now, he has Raytheon stock. He might well have stock in Lockheed and Boeing and all of those. And if he doesn't, or whether he does or not, I guarantee the people that he's close with do. His nuclear family probably does as well. This is one of the scams that they get to run. That they throw US weapons at Syria, weapons we pay for, they personally profit. And if it comes to the point where US soldiers actually have to die, they're not serving, they're not going to Syria. It's a perfect racket.
It is. And look, as you perfectly mentioned, it's speculation to say that he has profited from the recent uptick in the stock price for Raytheon, because we don't know, he could have sold that stock. But I would counter that notion with the fact that anyone who invests in stock and wants to see, their investment grow knows that probably the most stable stock in the United States is anything related to weapons manufacturers, because we have, an industrial military complex. Like, we love the fact that we can continuously go to war. We have industries that continuously make money off of us starting wars, continuing wars, escalating wars. So I would find it hard to believe that he would, sell those stocks. But who knows, he might have. So you have to be fair to him and state what the speculation is and what the facts are.
Well, I've been very clear on the record, I will not be fair to him.
Right.
But I will say it's likely that if we had all the information, this is probably one of the instances of corruption from Donald Trump where he profited less. I believe that there are other areas like the trademarks in China, some of the real estate deals, the hotel in DC, the way that Mar-a-Lago is making just hundreds of thousands of dollars extra every single week because of his activities there. Those are far worse. But we bring this up because I want you to understand the breadth of the potential for corruption, that it's not simply in his business, like real estate. It extends to almost every area, and that is why it's so crucial for us to get access to his finances, including, perhaps most importantly, his tax returns. Now, there are a lot of people who have given up on that. We tried to get it, and now some are saying, why are we focusing so much on that? We're focusing on this because the potential for conflicts of interest are horrifying and worse than they've ever been. Every politician can be influenced by their donors. We fight that on a daily basis here at TYT. But not every politician can be personally enriched through corruption. Generally, they at least have to wait until they become a lobbyist or until the donations come in. But Donald Trump, every day that the market operates, gets to benefit from the corruption based on his actions. And that's why we need far more information, far more disclosure on his finances. And that's why we have to fight for it. And you have an opportunity, actually. In just a couple of days, it's gonna be tax day. There are massive marches going on across the country for tax day to get him to release his taxes. I wanna see those numbers swell so big that the media has to report on him, put pressure on him. Whether he actually releases the taxes or not, it can make him look like the corrupt SOB that he actually is. And that's why I wanna see people participating in those marches.
Let me just be clear about one thing though. I think that the Americans who are saying that we're focusing way too much on asking him to disclose his financial dealings and his tax documents are just conditioned by a corrupt political system. They're so used to it that they don't even see how devastating these conflicts of interest can be for the safety of Americans, by the way. If he's making military decisions and foreign policy decisions based on how he can profit personally, well, he's gonna put innocent Americans on the line in military interventions throughout the world. So keep that in mind. But also, look, the lack of transparency in this administration is unlike anything that we've seen before, because there's a lack of transparency in every administration, right? But keep in mind that he doesn't want to deal with the media, right? During these press conferences, they want to shut out specific types of questions. And if anyone in the media has the audacity to push back against anyone in the administration, they go ahead and defame them as much as they can, as fake news, as an illegitimate news source, this and that. So there's that part of it. Right now, there are watchdog groups that are fighting tooth and nail to get the Trump administration to do what the Obama administration did, which is publish information about the lobbying groups that meet with Trump in the White House. He refuses to do that, okay? Obama did do that, okay? I didn't even know about it as he was president, but that's important information for us to know. Which lobbyists is he meeting with? What interest groups are influencing his decision making? So the lack of transparency is something that we should have expected, especially considering the fact that he decided that he would not share any financial information of his, including his tax documents.
Our reporter Jordan Chatton broke the Donna Brazile story. He was right, she just apologized for it. Help us get more reporters like that. You're the one responsible for that. Thank you, and let's do more right now at tytnetwork.com/go.